because I also find it really tough to learn just by using an app or, reading something somewhere. And so what I've done is, for example, I could just work from home, but there's a co-working space. And so I'm like, no, I'm going to go into the co-working space so that I hear people, talk in French, and so that I can have conversations with them and really try. I don't know whether you've come across a concept of Ikigai. It's a Japanese concept. And so I do a lot of work with individuals around that, around really leaning into a strengths-based approach, or maybe do road trips around Europe, or I don't know. So we're starting to almost think, what's the next chapter look like? So I like to think of life in chapters. And when I work with clients, actually, sabbaticals and career breaks act as the bookmarks in between.
Hi, welcome to Rooted and Routed podcast, the podcast about expat life. I'm your host, Sabia Pathan Pithuk. Today, I have another special guest, another story to uncover. And time and again on my podcast, I have come across the problem about spouses not being able to work when they move with their partners. And they can be on a sabbatical of 2 years or 3 years, but some end up being on a long sabbatical journey. And from sabbatical journey to get back to your career or what to do is a big question mark. Today, I have somebody special who is going to uncover about that topic. Her name is Rebecca Thomas. Welcome, Rebecca, onto you. Let us just talk about your background and give us a little bit of introduction about your work.
Of course. And firstly, thank you ever so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here, Sabia. I am a sabbatical and career break coach, as well as a sort of career transition coach. Yeah. So my story started back probably when I actually got my first job, because I fell into recruitment. So I was certainly not intentional about what I chose to do as a career, but I fell into recruitment back in 2002. Mm-hmm. And after 7 really great years in the UK, I decided that I wanted something more, and so started to look at immigration options and being sponsored by my company to go somewhere globally that wasn't the UK, and was lucky enough to secure a role in Sydney. So that was my first sort of emigration experience, and I moved from the UK to Australia with my husband. Mm-hmm. Same role though, or sort of same business. I stayed in recruitment, and then had 5 amazing years in Sydney, both from a professional and a personal perspective. I had always dreamed of reaching director level in the company that I worked for. So that was really my career goal from day one.
Right? That's a good ambition. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And so once that came and I actually achieved the director target, it was really weird, because it was amazing and I celebrated and I felt, really proud and happy for a few weeks. And then it was this realization of, okay, well, what's next? And I had this sort of wobble of, what's next professionally, but also we'd been in Australia for 5 years. I was starting to really miss friends and family from back home, and so wasn't sure that I wanted to stay in Australia long term. My husband had fallen in love with Australia, so he would have stayed put. So there's your other challenge, isn't it? When you're emigrating with a partner, it can really shift relationships and shift identities and dreams and sort of the future. And so what we did is we took a sabbatical. So we really decided that we needed to press pause on life. We needed to take some time out to really decide what the next chapter looked like. And so that's what we did. We took a 6-month that turned into an 8-month unpaid sabbatical. So it was a lot of planning for it from a financial perspective and also logistical perspective. And we took the time out to really decide what we wanted the next chapter to look like. And we sort of prototyped going back to the UK to see whether we wanted to live there again. And after a month, it was very clear that we didn't want to. And we had previously bought a very derelict old barn in France. And so we also prototyped going there for a couple of months to see whether we wanted that to be part of the next chapter and whether we wanted to, maybe live there. And then we took some time out to just travel, to really just reflect and digest on sort of life up until that point and what we wanted it to look like in the future. And we kind of landed on 3 themes. So we landed on a constant summer, because we both hate winter. We landed on a life full of all of our favourite people, which, because we had an expat life, were in the UK and in Australia, so on 2 sides of the world. And we landed on freedom, because we wanted freedom of location, we wanted freedom to be able to spend time with all of our favourite people, and we wanted financial freedom as well. So we kind of decided, okay, is there a way that we could have it all? And through a planning process, we decided that we probably could, if we really sort of broke it down into small achievable goals. So we went back to Sydney. We worked for 5 years. We had a financial goal that we worked towards, and I also retrained. So I retrained as a coach, taking all of my sort of 20 years of recruitment experience and career coaching into account. And in 2022, we emigrated for the second time, and we emigrated to France, and we now live in France probably about 7-8 months of the year, with then the rest of the year where we come back to enjoy the Sydney summer and also do a lot of travel in between. And so I set up my practice, my coaching practice, which is career transition, sabbatical, and career break coaching.
Wow. That was a great story. Right now, you are in Sydney. So
I am.
So post, I think December, the New Year, then you will be in France.
Too cold. We'll be in Sydney until March, and then March we plan to travel Vietnam for a month.
Wow.
And then after that we will be 2 weeks in Sicily, in Italy. So we're going to meet my mum and dad and my auntie and uncle in Sicily for 2 weeks, and then we will be back in France.
That kind of life, I'm sure, that kind of freedom, I'm sure everybody wants, but they keep on wondering, what is it, right? So and now I understand from your story why you wanted that kind of freedom. So that was my question. So let's move on to the next one. How does the process look like when you are onto that journey? You said you have to really plan a lot on the finances, the logistical part. Is that something that you look into it, and does it change after, let's say, a certain period of time? Or is it like, okay, planned for the next 1 year, this is how it is?
It's
an interesting life, question. Right? Because Sydney has, the cost of living there is quite different than in France. It's quite expensive. So if you're not socializing, I mean, for me, socializing means stepping out and eating out with your friends, having a good time. But if you have to have limitations on that part, okay, so what do you do then? I mean, just trying to understand the financial part there, the planning part.
So it's funny, isn't it? Because actually some things are much cheaper in Sydney. So for example, I would say that the cost of food, so actually supermarket food, eating out, drinking out, is actually a lot less than Europe and France. So it's actually, cheaper over here. And, for example, a good steak and chips and salad in France, you would be looking at around the sort of 30 euros, 35 euros. Here in Australia, you could get that for $25, which is, you know, half basically. So there are some things that are more expensive, but there's also others that aren't. So it kind of, you know, equals itself out. The other consideration is when we're in France, we don't have any rent or mortgage outgoings because we bought this derelict barn and we are doing it up. So at the moment, it's definitely not luxury. One day it will be, but at the moment, you know, we are kind of living in a bit of a building site and having to navigate that as we go. But what that does is mean that we've got 7 months where a huge proportion of a normal living cost, which is rent or mortgage, we don't have. So of course that then is banked for when we come to Sydney, and we do have to, you know, pay rent, which is astronomical in Sydney. So it kind of evens itself out. With regards to your question around the process, I think it's different for every individual. For us, we very much looked at it as the next chapter. And for us, it was a 5 to 7 year chapter that we were comfortable visioning, then reverse engineered how we would get there. And that would be, we worked out 5 years of coming back to Sydney and working and planning and saving. So actually that then almost takes you to a 12-year
a vision of 12 years, right?
Yeah. And then, you know, I think it's about reviewing constantly because we all change and we're all supposed to change. So it's like, okay, we're now living our chapter, but what does the next chapter look like? And we're actually starting it. It's funny because we're actually starting to reimagine and rethink. So when the house is done and we're not working on the house solidly throughout the summer months in Europe, like, what do we want life to look like? We will have more freedom of being able to, you know, go away in the summer or maybe do road trips around Europe, or I don't know. So we're starting to almost think, what's the next chapter look like? So I like to think of life in chapters. And when I work with clients, actually, sabbaticals and career breaks act as the bookmarks in between.
Okay. Yeah. For yourself as well, right? Personally. So while you're helping the others in their transition, it is also very much part of your transition and the next chapter. And that is a fantastic.
Absolutely.
And when you are dealing with the clients, I'm talking about that you help them define their future self, right? Rediscovering themselves sometimes. And how do you help that? Because it may differ in societal norms, right? That if you have, like in yourself, you are into human resource recruitment. So ideally, you should stick with that in your career. Making a jump or moving to another career path is something like questioned, and probably people will ask you, okay, what are the chances that you will get success there? And then you have to really train yourself. I mean, you have to train the clients. What is success path when you change the possibilities of having success there? And because many times it's quite unsure. So how do you uncover such things? Help the clients with their transition. I mean, future self is hard to define if you don't know, because sabbatical is quite uncertain. So while you can plan, some people sabbatical planning is a little hard. And then defining yourself there is also hard. Something you don't see. How do you define your future self there? How do you help them?
So it comes down to, I do a lot of work on individuals' values and what's super important to them, and what their ideal, there's a lot of undoing of previous stories or preconceived ideas or what we think we should do, and what we've been told that, you know, this is what you need to do. And as you say, societal blueprint. So it's about really unpeeling all of that and getting to the crux of what an individual really values, what their values are, and then aligning their strengths and what they love doing. I don't know whether you've come across a concept of Ikigai. It's a Japanese concept. And so I do a lot of work with individuals around that, around really leaning into a strengths-based approach, what they love doing, what their strengths are, what their unique gift is, and then really around there's a real sort of fine line, I think, between limiting beliefs and circumstances, because sometimes we have circumstances that might not be within our control, but it's about how we can actually turn those into opportunities. So I know, some of your listeners, for example, will have visa constraints. So that's not a limiting belief, right? Because that is a black and white. You are not allowed to work per se. You cannot engage in any commercial activity where there is you're paid for something. So that is a circumstance. But I think where the belief bit comes in is then unpacking, well, what does work mean and what does success mean to you? And actually within these circumstances, how can you be living your best life and filling your cup, and then working towards that for the period of time that you've got? So I do a lot of visualization exercises with individuals. So the powerful technique of really going back to that childhood imagination, of throwing away all of what we think we should be doing, and really imagining an environment and a life and a day or month that would be your best life, and then reverse engineering from that. We break it down with sort of big goals, but then smaller milestones and action steps. I think there's a big piece around also gap analysis. So looking at, this is ideally what I want to do, but what do I need to be able to get there? Who can help me get there? Is there any upskilling that I need to do? Is there any, educational knowledge gaps that I need to be able to fill? And then mindset. So the mindset around can do, around really shifting any limiting beliefs, if there are any, and turning every challenge into an opportunity, or reframing it differently and looking at it differently. And then I suppose the sort of final part of the process is around accountability and working with individuals to get themselves to hold themselves accountable, but also working with friends or partners and asking for help around accountability, and then reflection and reviewing and celebrating the small steps, and then celebrating the big steps as well.
Do you think your being in human resource recruitment career helped you in this coaching? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was naturally doing the career coaching all the way through my 20-year recruitment career. So absolutely, I think the coaching training then that I did was more around giving me the tools of the right questions to ask, how to frame sessions with clients, expanding my reference pool within that expertise space, and almost just shifting the skill set that I had, and transferring those skills into just a new space. That is such an interesting work. I'm just imagining you doing the whole bit. Because every time when you have an expat or a client, and they all differ, have you come across somebody who really had a challenge of language barrier? So I can imagine that must be like a big task for a person to first be fluent or learn the local language, and then think about yourself. I mean, that's a complex situation sometimes with some people. Have you come across some non-English?
No, I haven't. So I haven't worked with anybody who's had a language challenge. However, hello, I do.
Yeah.
So having moved to France,
Yeah.
that has been one of the biggest challenges for me. So I am not a French speaker. Language and linguistics do not come easily to me. And so that's been for my husband and I, actually, a huge challenge, because we emigrated to Australia, fine, but, very easy, right? Everybody speaks English. I worked for the same company I worked with in the UK. So very familiar. The offices all looked the same. There were lots of people that had gone through the same experience that we had. So almost a bit of a ready-made network and community and family out here. But in France, we knew nobody. I don't speak the language. I am learning, but finding it really tough. And the challenge, I think, comes from when you're very privileged and an English speaker. I have never been in a situation where I couldn't find my voice. I've always been very confident. I've been able to, articulate what I want to say. It's really tough being in an environment where you know what you want to say, but you just can't say it.
I know. Yeah. I think language barriers is one thing. I think one should not underestimate that part when you move abroad. And you might be very good in a lot of things, but if the language is not your strong point, it does take a bit of time. And I think that should be the first focus. Like in France, you will not be able to have your daily life easy if you don't speak French. I don't know, how do you do that? You're getting there, I'm sure. Yeah, you're learning the language, or?
Yeah, I think it's about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and putting yourself in as many opportunities as you can to almost learn by osmosis, because I also find it really tough to learn just by using an app or, reading something somewhere. And so what I've done is, for example, I could just work from home, but there's a co-working space. And so I'm like, no, I'm going to go into the co-working space so that I hear people, talk in French, and so that I can have conversations with them and really try. And so I've sort of said to them, can you please pick me up on, my challenges, or, when I'm not saying something correctly, can you help me with my language?
I have gone through the same in Belgium and in Sweden. So the language is quite different, and you hear it, you want to make an effort, but sometimes the person right in front of you probably doesn't have enough patience to give you a chance. Like, yeah, I'm listening. What do you want to say? Right?
Yeah.
If you don't have it, then you feel, oh my God, I made an effort to speak, and now I made a fool of myself. And now, okay, you know what? I'm not going to try again. So yeah, it's really back and forth learning.
Really tough.
It's a tough one. It's not easy. So you have to have the community around. Otherwise, it's a little difficult. With this, I would like to know if you have any story that you really remember that was challenging, wherein you were helping this person find the new direction, but it took longer than you expected. Which, I mean, if let's say you take 3 months, you're coaching with somebody for 3 months, but there was one such client who took much longer to realize her own potential, her or his own potential, and take that leap of faith. Was there any such example?
Oh, it's a good question.
Or was it like everybody, whoever have been in touch with you, were through past the coaching sessions with flying colors and were happy? I mean, if it is possible. I mean,
look, I think everybody's very different. There's two ways that I work with individuals. One is on an hourly coaching basis, and there's no sort of finite time that people start or finish with regards to that. The other one is on a program. So I run a sabbatical or a career break program, and that's 6 sessions. And that's normally 2 sessions sort of planning the sabbatical, and then 2 sessions whilst they're on their career break or sabbatical, and then 2 sessions when they come back and integrate all of their lessons and their learns, and sort of the experiences that they've had back into business as usual. In terms of somebody who has taken a longer time to sort of get to their, I don't know, their objective or their outcome, I'm not sure anybody actually gets there in a linear way.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that when I first talk to individuals, it's around saying to them, actually be prepared for your journey to twist and turn, because different things come up, different challenges come up. So yeah, I mean, if they go through the program, it is 6 sessions, and we cover that in the 6 sessions. But if it's ongoing coaching, then we work for as long as they need or want to work.